QSO Today, episode 504, Kahn NV4C. This episode of QSO Today is listener-sponsored. Only you can keep the QSO Today podcast coming to you every weekend since 2014. Please become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor banner on the show notes page or at the top of the QSOtoday.com webpage. This week I want to commend the following hams for their continuing monthly listener support of the QSO Today project. Mark Farrell, VK6OP, Joey Smith, N4VFA, J. Gordon Betty Jr., W2TTT, Grayson Evans, KJ7UM, and William Pitchman, W8LV. I know that for many of you, that your ham radio entertainment dollars are often spread thin, especially in these days of economic recession. I want to point out, though, that we do have a vendor affiliates page, like Amazon, QRP Labs, and now Radio Oddity, that will give QSO Today a commission on anything you buy, if you click on the link on the donations page that takes you to their sites before shopping. This is a painless way to help QSO Today without making cash contributions. Your using affiliate links first keeps us running and without commercial interruption. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. If you are new to the QSO Today podcast, please be sure to look at the QSOtoday.com website, where we have over 500 interviews with amateur radio operators. From there, you can click on links that take you to the QSO Today Academy. Our catalog contains over 500 videos hosted on Vimeo on every ham radio subject, completely searchable. Just a reminder that the response to my amateur radio events calendar has been great. You can get to it from the banner link in the show notes page. This calendar is updated by you, and I hope that it will be the most comprehensive amateur radio events calendar. Please use it and update it with your ham radio events. I may be late to the party, but I discovered almost by accident a database by a U.S. city of ham radio operators. This might be an excellent resource for ham radio clubs and individuals to find licensees who might be interested in club activities or just getting on the air. It is called the N8CIA Ham Search. I will be in Sequim, Washington in June and discovered using N8CIA Ham Search that there are over 700 hams in Sequim, Washington. Can you believe it? My thinking is that this database makes it easier to find an Elmer in your town, a ham radio friend, or a potential new member of your radio club or POTA guest in the park. Please let me know what you think. Kahn NV4C, with the encouragement of his father-in-law, joined the amateur radio ranks in his mid-30s. He hit the ground running, operating on his local club's repeater, involving himself in the North Fulton Amateur Radio League to aid in its resurgence and the introduction of new programs attracting new and old hams. NV4C discusses his ham radio journey, his operating passions, and what excites him most about our hobby in this QSO Today. NV4C, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Ian?
4Z1UG, this is November Victor 4 Charlie. I read you 5-9 in Roswell, Georgia, Eric.
Ian, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. My ham radio story, I got licensed in 2007. My story actually ends as a teenager with a missed opportunity on my part. And I think if I had a time machine and could go back and do it all over again, I would. When I was 13, 14, right after my bar mitzvah, I babysat for a family that belongs to the synagogue I grew up in. Mom taught in the Hebrew school on Monday afternoons, And Dad, of course, was still at work during Hebrew school. So Dad is Steve Reichlin, Alpha Alpha 4 Victor. I believe he's still an active ham in South Carolina. He lives in the Isle of Palms now. But I babysat for them one day a week, and the kids' playroom and Dad's ham shack Steve's ham shack were in the same room. So it'd be in with the kids playing, and there's all this ham equipment, all this gear, the QSL cards on the wall, and the big desk with the big boom mic hanging down. He had a big antenna in the backyard the tower seemed really large to a 13 or 14-year-old teenager. I'm not sure how tall it was, a 40, 50-foot tower maybe. And I was just, I was scared to ask the question, what is all this stuff? I was curious, but I was scared to ask the question because, that's all the dad stuff. That's the grown-up stuff. So we don't talk about that. We don't ask about it. And, if I knew then what I know now about trying to engage youth and getting kids involved in amateur radio, I probably would have been encouraged to ask the question and probably would have gotten licensed a long, long time ago.
Did you have an interest in radio or electronics or science or anything like that in those days?
Not that I can recall. I used to putter with stuff, and when I was a real little kid, I'd walk by. I used to walk home from school when I was in elementary school, and it was a mile, something like that. And people in the neighborhood, would leave, not necessarily electronics, like some of your other guests have had, but they leave like old wood, scraps of lumber out by the street for the garbage men to pick up. And I'd grab those and take them home and make things for my action figures. Once in a while, I'd take apart games that were broken, that were more mechanical as opposed to electrical in nature. Like my brother had a game that had this wind-up platform, little cups in the platform at various places, and you were essentially supposed to drop these parachuters from an airplane into the cups, and the platform got overwound. I got curious about it one day, so I took the thing apart, and I solved the overwind problem. Unfortunately, when I solved it, I reversed all the mechanisms. So it wound in the other direction and wound backward, but it worked again at least. So, but other than that, no, I didn't really, that I can recall, have any nascent interest in electronics. Or I've always been kind of into computers, though. So maybe that's a segue.
So, what was your first computer?
My first computer, right after my bar mitzvah, was a knockoff from an Apple II Plus.
It wouldn't be a Chinese knockoff yet.
Actually, I think it was. Even that long ago, I had a cousin that was looking to represent this company. He's a few years older than me. As a career, was looking to represent this company. He ended up not doing it. He moved on to other things, but he got me the computer and the whole setup at a very deep discount. So we used some of my bar mitzvah earnings to pay for that. And that was the first computer I had.
That was a Motorola microprocessor like the Apple had in those days?
Yeah, probably.
What did you run on it? Did you run Linux?
Mostly games. This was 84, 85 time frame, so it predated Linux. I mean, Unix was a thing, but Unix wasn't a thing for home computers. This was still in the days where you loaded your, whatever you were going to do. Like
CPM in those days, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was Apple, so it wasn't even CPM or DOS because IBM didn't have a crossover. It was, if you wanted to play a game, you put the floppy disk in the drive and you boot it up and load it to the game. Or if you wanted to run the word processor, you put that in the disk drive and load it to that. And, the monitor was an old CRT, big old heavy CRT monitor. But that was my first computer, and I used that for things like writing papers for school and playing games and all the things teenagers in the mid-'80s, early to mid-'80s used computers for. I was the geek that went to computer camp in the summer instead of going to football camp or baseball camp, things like that.
And did you make computing your profession?
I did. I've been in IT for almost 30 years now. I started out, actually, it's not what I studied in college. It was IT is a second career. The first career barely counts as a career. I majored in education. I was a school teacher for 4 months. So I taught middle school social studies and language arts, and I wanted to be a high school history teacher and coach the debate team. Those were my big things in high school.
So what happened?
I was a horrible teacher. I'm awful at it, and I didn't like it. I didn't deal well with the kids. I don't have the patience to deal with kids that age. It was a self-exploration lesson.
So how did you make the transition from that? Obviously, you spent 4 years getting a degree and then doing the student teaching. And how did you make that transition to IT then?
I went back to college. My first degree, I graduated from the University of Georgia with a degree in education. The only job I could get teaching was in Columbia, South Carolina, in my hometown. School systems in 1993 in the state of Georgia, my perception was they weren't interested in hiring male teachers that couldn't coach football. And while I enjoy football and enjoy watching it, and that's how I spend my Saturdays in the fall, I would have been worse than a disaster trying to coach it. I don't know enough about it to be a coach, so they wouldn't talk to me. I got a break from a friend of my mother's, worked in the school system that I came out of in South Carolina, and she got me an interview with the director of specialty programs on both the remedial end and the honors and AP end. So I think your wife is a teacher, yes?
Yes, she is. Yeah, 40 years.
Okay, so you're probably familiar that special needs isn't just what we consider in the U.S., at least the students that struggle with education. Honors and AP students are also considered special needs because they need academic challenges that don't fit the mainstream boilerplate curriculum, right? So, I had an interview with this lady, and she hired me straight out of my undergraduate. And dropped me in a classroom. So I was teaching 6th grade language arts and 7th grade geography. And I had wonderful support, all the other teachers in the program, in this special program for high achieving students. Very open, very welcoming, very supportive. And I was just a disaster in the classroom. So I left that and I went back to college at the University of South Carolina, intending to major in computer science. At the same time, my father had done some marketing work for a couple of brothers that went to our synagogue that were doing software development for an operating system IBM was pushing at the time called OS2. Okay, so that's how I got my foot in the IT door, was working for these brothers. I started out doing just clerical work, answering the phone, doing the filing, bringing in the mail, running errands, that kind of thing. And then they had a customer. I'd been there about a year, and they had a customer who wanted to make a significant investment in their product, huge numbers of licenses. It was a bank out in California, but they needed training, and they knew I had an education degree. So they said, all right, we've got a special project for you. You're going to learn OS2, you're going to learn our product, and you're going to write the training for us. Okay, fine. Sounds like fun. Except I only had 6 weeks to do all of this. So it was there was a lot of heads down and a lot of late nights and a lot of weekends. But at the end of the day, the effort was successful. And as part of teaching me everything, they moved me from clerical work into technical support and doing a little bit of technical writing, helping write some of the help documentation in their product, things of that nature. And that was really the move, the transition into IT and into what I've been doing now for 3 decades. And I've worked for all kinds of companies. I left Columbia and moved to Atlanta to go to work for the company used to be called Anderson Consulting. Now it's Accenture. And I worked for them for 4 years. And when I left them, I spent, the usual time bouncing among, several software companies, and I've done some consulting. And now I am the team lead for the identity and access management team under information security for one of our local hospitals here.
Okay, so then what happened to ham radio? It seems to me like you were one of the older kids to join, at least when you came in. So how did you find your way back to ham radio?
I found my way back through my father-in-law. He got his license in I think about 1992. And when my wife and I started dating, he at the time had a little bit of the IT geek bug, that I brought with me, given the career and while I was in Atlanta. he and I would do things like go to computer shows together, go run around and do things together. And he'd get in the van and turn on his 2-meter radio, or we'd be, he was a technician at the time. Or we'd be sitting in his room building a computer, or, he'd ask me to try to help him solve a computer problem. And he'd turn on his 2-meter rig and just, listen to the repeaters while we were sitting there working. But after about 7 or 8 years of this, no, it had to be longer than that. Anyway, after a number of years of this, I decided he looked like he was having an awful lot of fun. Early 2007, I was like, I think I'm finally ready to take the plunge and get my ham ticket. And so for my birthday in 2007, he bought me the Gordon West Technician Guide. And I spent about 3 or 4 weeks studying that. And I was, making hundreds on all the tests every single time I took a practice test. And it's like about a week before the exam, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to try and see if I can get my general in too. Because if I'm going to go in, I'm going to go all in. Well, 2/3 of the way in at any rate. So I bought the general guide and spent, another 4 or 5 days studying for that. And then in late April of 2007, he took me down to, we took our test with the radio club at Georgia Tech in downtown Atlanta. And I passed my tech in general. And that was how I got into the hobby. Was brought in by my father-in-law, Steve Knittel. His call sign now is AB4TT. And he was KC4YBO at the time. And and this is all after the FCC waived the CW requirement for testing.
Right, so that wasn't necessary.
Right.
So it's 2007, you've got your first ham radio license. What was like the first thing you wanted to do, and what was the first thing that you did?
The first thing I wanted to do was get on HF. It took a little bit longer to get that first station together. Not a horribly long time, a couple of weeks, but it still took some time. So he loaned me an HT, and I said one of the old ICOM brick HTs that had you tuned it through the spinner dial on the top, like the IC2A maybe.
The 2A, yeah, or W2A. It had like a glass front on it. It had a DTMF pad.
No, this one didn't have a DTMF pad.
Or did it have thumb switches on top?
Yeah, it had thumb wheels on top.
I think that was a 2AT.
Yeah, you tuned in like the last 4 digits of the repeater. So that was my first rig, and we stuck an antenna and a mag mount on my car, and as a temporary, until I could get a lit mount. So the first thing I did was 2-meter repeater. And it was great because my commute at that time was a minimum of 45 minutes to an hour each way. I lived in one part of Atlanta, and where I worked, I was going with traffic both directions, which made the commute just abysmal.
How were you received in Atlanta on the repeaters as a new ham?
I think I was received fairly well. In those days, the club that I belonged to, the North Fulton Amateur Radio League, was in a regrowth, in a resurgence period, and so everyone was very, very open and very, very welcoming. And I think as a club we still are. And we love to have the new hams get on the repeater and talk to people because that's how you get experience. That's how you learn. And then there was another repeater that I also frequented, one of the other radio clubs, and that repeater was a lot of fun too. I made a lot of friends on that repeater. So I feel like, in 2007, I didn't have any issues getting my feet wet and jumping into the pool, as it were.
I know that the Norfolk Amateur Radio League had like a renaissance in terms of building up its numbers and creating programming and stuff. For anybody that's listening that has a club that's kind of on the decline, what did they do to increase their membership and create excitement and buzz?
One correction, if I may, it's the North Fulton Amateur Radio League. We're in North Fulton County in Georgia, in the Atlanta metro area. So the story, as I heard it, the resurgence started before I got licensed, but my father-in-law was very actively involved. The club was down to about 4 or 5 members, and they were meeting for dinner at one of the barbecue places and having a meeting at the restaurant. And they realized they were in trouble. They invited our then ARRL section manager, who was at the time was Susan Swiderski, and unfortunately I don't know her call sign off the top of my head. pardon me. But she's still, she's still fairly active here in the Atlanta area. They invited her to a meeting and asked that same, that very question. It's like, what do we do? How do we bolster our membership? And one of her answers, as I'm told, was, don't eat where you hold your meetings, or don't hold your meetings at your dining place. So to that end, the club, they'd have dinner at a local restaurant, and then they found a place to have their club meetings. By the time I joined the club, they were meeting at the command center for one of the local jurisdiction fire stations. They were meeting in their training center. And we were getting, the club was up to about 75 or 100 people at the time, and we were getting 30 to 50 people at a meeting. And it was, separate where you eat from where you meet, and then make sure you have programs that are going to interest people. So like one of the first meetings I attended, the program was a presentation on, there was a de-expedition to Scarborough Reef that had just wrapped up a month or two before. So there was a presentation on Scarborough Reef. We did things that were training how-tos, things that were introducing new technologies as they evolved. How we grew was making sure we had variety of programming, and that we were talking about it on the repeaters and updating the website and getting a new website. Also about that time, in 2008, we started a volunteer examiner team. And I got involved with that right away. The volunteer examiner team at that time was led by Vern Fowler, W8BLA. I joined with several of our friends, and we started giving tests. And we started doing it quarterly at first, and then we moved to doing exams monthly. And Vern ran the team for several years, and I was his backup. And then when he decided that he needed to pull back because of other commitments and other obligations on his time, I took it over. And I've been running the team for probably 8 or 10 years now. I've lost track. I've been doing it for so long.
And now this mid-show break. The QSO Today project that now includes 500 episodes of the QSO Today podcast, the curation of hundreds of hours of QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo presentations for public consumption, is now supported completely by you, the listeners. I am using a business model called Value for Value, a concept developed by Adam Curry, K5ACC, where you contribute to QSO Today exactly what you think its value is to you. Value for Value. This mid-show break and the promotion of the Ham Radio Workbench podcast later in the show are the only commercials that interrupt the program. QSO Today has no commercial sponsors to influence the content, direction, and editorial content of the QSO Today project, which exists solely for the promotion of the amateur radio hobby. Those of you that have listened to over 500 podcast episodes know that I'm not only infatuated by the amateur radio hobby, but by the people who perpetuate it as well. The hours that I dedicate to QSO Today is a half-time job. Your support at any level pays for all of the technology that I use to create, produce, host, and deliver the QSO Today podcast and the project to the ham radio community. And while it is a labor of love, it costs money. I know from statistics and surveys that only 6% of you actually contribute to QSO Today in some form. Please make a generous donation using the slider to set the amount of your donation. Make that donation monthly to ensure that QSO Today is here for the next 500 episodes. As a value-for-value donation, it should be in the amount that you value each episode of QSO Today, or your access to our amazing catalog of ham radio educational videos found on YouTube, Vimeo, and using our own player link in the show notes page. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually. Use my Amazon link in the right column of the QSO Today website before shopping on Amazon. Promote QSO Today to your friends and family by forwarding our email and social media posts. Subscribe to our mailing lists. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Tell your friends. All of these actions are value for value. Keep the QSO Today project alive by taking action now. We return to our QSO today. How do you attract non-licensees to your VE sessions? How does the club advertise that there's going to be examinations and assuming training as well?
Well, that was another thing that we did, training. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Our club is an ARRL affiliate club. We're an ARRL special service club, and we're an ARRL affiliate VE team. So I heavily utilize the ARRL website. I put all of our exam sessions published on the league's VE session calendar or exam session calendar. So it's out there. And we're on several different calendars here in the Atlanta area as well, for several different clubs. And my contact info and email is out there in the wild, and people call me and they email me with questions, and I give them the details, and we get them registered to take the test.
So do you create press releases for the local press?
No.
So the people that you're getting are people that at least found the ARRL as a first step?
Yeah. Or they've looked at one of the other calendars, or they've asked their friends, where did you get your license? There's a lot of word of mouth involved with it, I think.
How many people would you get for a session?
We went through a period pre-COVID. We'd get 8, 10 people come to a VE session. And in those days, in the pre-COVID days, we were using one of our county parks, one of the city parks. One of the municipalities here was letting us use some of their space in their senior services center. And we took walk-ins. People could just come in and take a test. We get 8 to 10 on average, I think, when we were doing that. And then COVID hit, and of course, we couldn't give exams for several months when everything was shut down. And we actually lost the use of the park facility. They decided that they were no longer going to allow outside groups in. So we were kind of fumbling about, struggling, looking for a new place to give our exams. And one of the local barbecue restaurants told us they would open their dining room to us with certain stipulations. And they were totally reasonable stipulations, maximum number of people that you could have, because, they only hold so many people in their dining room. We had to be done by a certain time because they had to get ready to open their business for lunch. We couldn't take walk-ins. So we adjusted, we shifted, and we started requiring walk-ins. And then when we were down for about 3 or 4 months, unable to give exams, and then this restaurant opened up to us, and we were following all the right all the COVID procedures at the time, vaccination and masking and distancing and all the things that we could do. During those first few months of COVID, we were getting full houses with waiting lists. We were getting 20 people with waiting lists of anywhere from 5 to 10 people.
What do you think caused that sudden interest in ham radio? I mean, obviously the COVID event did, but it seems so strange that, a lot of people, when you run into them, they can't believe that amateur radio still exists.
Right.
Where do you think that interest came from suddenly?
Some of it was just the pent-up demand from when we were shut down. We know that. People had planned and were ready to come test, and then COVID hit the world. We couldn't give tests, so we had this huge backlog of people that wanted to test and get licensed. Part of it too, I think, stemmed from the COVID event itself. You couldn't go anywhere. Travel was very tightly restricted. Businesses had all shut their offices down, and everybody was on work from home. And all the things that went with that, at least here in the U.S. And I think that drove some of it as well, because people needed a social outlet of some kind, or a general communication outlet of some kind. And they saw a ham radio as a way to do that. And I'm sure there was probably an uptick. I haven't done any research on this. I'm speculating. But there was probably an uptick in GMRS licenses at the time too. There were probably an increase in the use of the FRS service. And each of them serves different markets and different communities. So I think people that were looking for a way to keep in touch with people in other cities, or ways to kind of spread their net and cast a wider net and get out of just the communication in their local area and have the ability to communicate in other areas. I think that probably drove some of it too.
Do you have any understanding of how many of the people that were licensed that took the exams and passed, how many of those people came on the air? And did you have programs for retention or follow-up in order to make sure that they joined the club, that they got on the air, that they had some kind of an Elmer?
I don't have specific numbers or specific data to give you on that. I can tell you that we do give a free 1-year membership to our club to anybody that passes an initial exam or an upgrade at one of our exam sessions. They get one per lifetime. So if you take a technician exam with us and pass it, we give you a free year. If you come back 6 months later and get your general, you're still on that one free year, and that one free year is all you get. We had a program in the club, somebody else was administering it, to help assign Elmers to new hams to help them get their feet wet and get set up properly and get off the ground. And I probably should follow up on that. I'm not sure where that program has gone or what's happening with that. But some of the things that we do once we were able to start opening back up again, obviously the club meetings, trying to get people, talk to people and, hey, come to the club meeting. But we've got a lot of groups in our club that like to engage in the various activities. Like we've got a very active group within our club that are all huge POTA enthusiasts. So they'll go out and do POTA activations. Or there's another group that are huge SOTA Summits on the Air activations. So they'll go every Saturday and they'll go find another summit around here and activate. And there are a number of summits in this area. The part of Georgia we're in is in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. So, and the Appalachian Trail starts in Georgia, about 2 hours from where I live. So there are plenty of opportunities for that. There's a gentleman who just finished activating. I think there are 224 is the number I saw, POTA parks in the state of Georgia, and he just activated number 224 for him. So there's all kinds of activities. We've got several members who are very active, not in IOTA, but in the U.S. Islands on the Air program. And the club as a whole just had at the beginning of May, every year for the U.S. Islands, there's a big U.S. Islands activity weekend, the first in early May, and we go out to the club goes out to an island in our the big lake that's near here, Lake Lanier, which is the reservoir built by our local power utility. But there are U.S. islands in that lake. So the club goes out to one of them, and it's almost like a mini field day. They set up 2 or 3 stations and have a cookout, and they do it as a one-day event, and that tends to draw a fairly sizable crowd. And then, of course, Field Day is one of our big activities every year that we put a lot of effort and time into. So we encourage the people to come out to Field Day, and for the last several years, I've run. We do a radio merit badge workshop as our educational activity. So I've been doing that, and sometimes we'll get 1 or 2 youngsters that way.
With all of these groups, how important is social media like Facebook or Google Groups or something like that to communicating from the club to the membership? But also, maybe it sounds to me, if you've got all these subgroups, that there's that opportunity as well to create sub pages or Facebook pages or something like that for the POTA group or the SOTA group in the club that wants to do things together. How important has social media become to the radio club?
My opinion, I think people might have a differing opinion, a little where I don't want to speak for other people. I don't want to stick my foot in my mouth either. We have a Facebook page. It's reasonably active, but it's used for more general interest kinds of things. People in the club that find interesting tidbits will post them to our Facebook page. And then like Field Day, we do a lot of publicizing Field Day, obviously on our Facebook page, because there's it's a good medium, and there are Field Day bonus points tied to that as well. We use more for communication within the club. We have a groups.io forum that's very active. It's NFARL, November Foxtrot Alpha Romeo Lima, for North Fulton Amateur Radio League. That, I think, is probably our bigger communications medium, that and our club website. We have a webmaster. We have a webmaster that keeps our website very up to date. It's very current on our upcoming activities. All of our VE sessions are all, you'd asked me about that, are all publicized there, all the information on that, when, where, how to register, field day, any upcoming activities get publicized there. We're also, as a club, very active and big supporters of the ARIS project, amateur radio on the International Space Station. And at least one of the ARIS board members is a member of our club. And we've done several ARIS contacts with schools in Georgia, and I know we did one in North Carolina last spring, and I can't remember which one, but we do ARIS contacts with elementary and middle schools in the area, all throughout Georgia, and those have been wildly successful. And hopefully we're getting a few youngsters that way too.
What is the relationship that your club has with the local scout councils, scouting groups, and is it symbiotic? I mean, does it seem to help feed each other?
I don't know that it's symbiotic, and I'm less involved. I'm nominally the scout coordinator for our club, simply because the last gentleman who did it had to step back due to other obligations in his life. He was much more involved. He was a troop master and obviously a radio merit badge counselor, and very much more actively involved in scouting through his three sons, all of whom have now aged out and moved on to other things. And as noted, he's had other obligations. I got involved with the radio merit badge when my son was in scouting. He aged out back in September. He wrapped up his scouting career. I've helped teach the merit badge for a number of years. We get 2 or 3 kids, occasionally through the radio merit badge that come in and decide they want to get licensed. And we're happy to reach out and help them and do what they need, help them with their studies and help them get prepared to take the exams.
I guess what I'm asking is, it seems almost like a natural thing that an amateur radio club could have a relationship, say, with the local scout council. I'm always thinking about this, like, could the amateur radio club go to campouts, for example, and set up in the corner of the campground a PODA station, for example, in the campground, so that the kids, when they're not doing other activities, can come and observe, operate, something like that, just as a way to kind of expose kids to various elements of amateur radio. And I've thought about doing that. We've done this once here, but it seems like maybe this is something we should be doing all the time as a way to continuously expose kids to different things. Maybe do a Pico balloon launch as part of a scout activity or something. I guess what I'm kind of looking is, it seemed to me, based on some of the stuff I was reading about your club, that there is a relationship that you've created, and I'm just curious about how deep that relationship goes.
Well, for me, it's more the local troop that my son was a part of. I'm still in touch with the Scoutmasters. In fact, I need to follow up because Field Day here in the U.S. is coming up in about 4 weeks, and I need to get the merit badge workshop in front of that troop to see if any of those young men are interested. And the troop masters in my son's old troop have helped me get in touch with the right people to get our workshop advertised to the district within our larger council. There are other hams in the metro area, in the Atlanta area, that have deeper relationships with scouting. They're scoutmasters, or they're more actively involved. They're Eagle Scouts themselves. And in fact, one of our camps here has or had a semi-permanent radio station on the property. So anytime there's camp going on, anytime there's another activity, if they can get hams to go out there and volunteer to take a couple of hours and go run the station, they'll run scouts through there and get them exposed and let them make contacts with whomever they can get contacts with based on all of the things, propagation and, the band and the power and all of that. So I think at a higher level, there's a good relationship between amateur radio and scouting here in this area. For my club, it's me, and it's me with my local troop today. I'm trying to encourage, I'm actually stepping back from that at the end of later this year because of changes in my own life and changes in direction. And I'm trying to encourage some of the other members of our club that may be tied into scouting to kind of pick up that mantle and keep it moving forward, because I don't want it to drop. I think it's a good service that we provide. I think it's valuable for the scouts to be able to learn about radio, because so much of what we do today, is tied to radio. It's tied to RF technology. At any rate, our wireless networks in our homes, the key fobs that run our cars, the phones that everybody carries around. It's all RF, and I think to help those kids gain a better understanding of how it works, better prepares them for a world that's becoming increasingly technological and reliant on RF and RF technologies.
I find a lot of cell phone owners don't realize that they're actually using a radio. I also read that in 2019 you were awarded the Fulton Amateur Radio League Ham of the Year. How important was that award to you, and what does it mean to get this award?
For me, it was a great honor. Some of the past recipients have been people that have been highly engaged and involved, not just in our club, but in the ham community in Atlanta and in the larger world as well. One of my Elmers and one of your previous guests, Whiskey for Quebec Oscar, Jim Stafford, episode 120, I think is what I found when I looked it up, was a recipient. And he was a president of QRP Archie, the International QRP Association for a couple of years, and was internationally known. So I feel like winning this the ham of the year, put me in a pantheon, if you will, of the best of what our club has to offer. The plaque is sitting here on the shelf above my desk. It's you get it. It's an honor, and you move on and keep doing the good work that got you there in the first place.
It sounds to me like from the very beginning of your amateur radio license, you've kind of hit the ground running, at least as far as the Amateur Radio Club is concerned. And it sounds to me like they've been very grateful to have you. Let's go on to operating. Tell me what the current rig is and what you like to operate on the rig.
The current rig is an old Elecraft K3, along with the whole K line. I've got the P3 pan adapter and the KPA 500 amplifier and KAT 500 tuner, and that's my in the shack rig. The antennas at the QTH are a 5-band hex beam, going back to the old Mike Trappy, who was one of the early pioneers in the hex beam technology. I've got one of his antennas. I've also got a 3-element 6-meter beam. I think it's a Cushcraft, one of the variants of a G5RV that I use for 40 and 80 meters. That's the shack here. I used to have a mobile shack as well. I've still got an FT8800 in my car, which is 2 meters, 70 centimeters. That's what I use when I'm commuting and doing the local repeater stuff. And then I have an FT857 Delta that used to be my mobile HF shack with a little Tar Heel 2 antenna on the back of my old car. My car that I had all that set up in died several years ago. It was due. It served me well, and I ran it into the ground. But I never, I didn't put the HF back in the car I'm driving now. I just put the FT8800 back in. Favorite operating activities today, FT8, single sideband. I like single sideband contesting. I like operating FT8 because it gives me the opportunity to make contacts with parts of the world that from my QTH I just can't get even on CW. I dabble with CW. I'm also a member of the Long Island CW Club and went through a bunch of their training, and that is a fabulous bunch of people for people that want to learn CW. highly recommend checking them out and talking to them. I dabble with CW. I do a little bit of it. I'm not very good at it because I don't practice it very often. I could get better. I just need to put the time and effort in.
And now this mid-show break. Every 2 weeks, I listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Vince, VE6LK, Mark, N6MTS, Thomas, K4SWL, Michael, VA3MW, and Rod, VA3ON, and their guest on often topical and important projects in amateur radio. This discussion amongst the regulars and their guests remind me of the conversations that I used to listen to on 146.94 and 146.46 megahertz in Orange County, California, while working on my own workbench almost 50 years ago. It is amazing how much practical ham radio knowledge that we can absorb by listening to the Workbench podcast that starts to make sense when we start our own deep dive into our own projects. So join me by listening to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast now and as George and crew push beyond 200 episodes. You can get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast by clicking on the banner in this week's show notes page. And now, back to our QSO. What's your favorite single sideband contest?
Favorite is probably the Georgia QSO party every year. That's the one I put the most effort into and the one I usually do the best at. And I tend to get a little bit better year over year. I try to run as close to all 20 hours of it as I can. After that, I like the CQ contests, the WPX and the DX contest, and then the ARRL DX contests. ARRL sweepstakes is fun. And AQP, the North America QSO party, is a fun one. So there are a number of them I like to play in, and it is playing. I'm except for the Georgia QSO party, I don't even try to be competitive in any of them. I just go in and dig in and have fun and just try to make contacts. And on the DX contests, at least see if I can, on the DX contests, at least, see if I can add some new DX entities to the log.
And how many DX entities do you have already?
I've got around 150, 160.
So you've gotten DXCC.
I've got a mixed mode DXCC. I've also got DXCC on 10, 15, and 20 meters. I'm 10 entities away from 40 meter. And then I'll have to pick up and figure out how I'm going to make it happen on 80 meters. That one's going to be a big challenge that I'm looking forward to.
And how do you like the hex beam?
I like it. I think it's a great antenna. There have been significant improvements made since Mike Traffy came up with his original design. The newer ones are I think probably a little bit better, a little bit broader band, and pick up a little bit more. But the one that I've got has been a great antenna for me. It's fabulous. If I can hear the station, generally speaking, I can work it. And that's the name of the game. So, and I've got it on a 30-foot tilt up with a Yaesu G450A rotor at the top. I can turn it and get it anywhere and make the contacts if I can hear them.
You've convinced me. I was looking at hex beams again today. I've been playing with VAR AC on 20 meters. It's quite interesting how my antenna propagates, but it looks like it has a very interesting front to back and nothing on the side. So I can hear New Zealand and Australia and North America, but there's no Southern Hemisphere except for the New Zealand and Australia. So it's quite interesting when you look at a map. And it's really the first time I've actually been on any digital modes in my life, so it's quite interesting to me. Okay, so you've got the nice Elecraft line, you've got the great antennas. You belong to the Southeastern DX Club. Are you active in the DX Club?
Not really. I used to be very active in it, and then I got to a point as I was raising my family that I had to make some decisions about where my activity was going to go, where my time was going to be spent. And the Southeastern DX Club is a great club. Its focus is around encouraging contesting and helping with DXpeditions, helping fund DXpeditions, helping encourage chasing DX. For me, personally, the North Fulton Amateur Radio League Radio Club meetings and the Southeastern DX Club meetings were different nights on the same week most of the time. Sometimes it lines up in different weeks, but they're both, the local club is the third Tuesday of the month and the DX Club is the third Thursday of the month. it just got to a point where I was trying to do both. And, for me, for my schedule, it was getting to be a little bit too much with work and with raising my family. So I continue to maintain my membership because I think it's a great club and worth joining. Their meetings have moved to Zoom meetings on their meeting nights. They don't have an in-person meeting anymore that I'm aware of, which means I can probably try to shoehorn it back in as my son is getting ready to head off to college. So there's less raising the family anymore. That's about it. I'm about ready to cut the tether on him and send him off into the world, as it were. So maybe I can get more involved.
Well, when I think of a DX club, though, there's these specialized clubs. Your regular radio club seems like, that's general radio club, and that these DX club, microwave societies, all this, they're specialties. I'm wondering if we were going to send hams to a specialty club because they have an interest in working DX, winning entities, working DXpeditions, that this is the way to do it. If you're looking for this specialized expertise, it sounds to me like this might be it.
Around here locally, I would tend to agree. We have people in our general interest clubs that are also active DX chasers and active contesters. And a lot of them are members of both their local club and the Southeastern DX Club. If you've got a specialized interest, I would certainly encourage finding those special interest clubs and adding them. I wouldn't suggest that they be your club membership in lieu of your general interest club. I would argue that if you have the time and the resources and can make it work, join both of them. Join your local general interest club and your DX club or your contesting club or your microwave society or whatever it is that interests you. And maybe even if you've got an interest in something and there's not a special interest club for it, start one. Find like-minded individuals and come together and create a club for your special interest.
What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
I think what excites me the most is the growth of the tent. The tent keeps getting bigger. People keep inventing new ways to do amateur radio. In the early days, it was CW and Spark Gap, and then it became CW and other kinds of transmitters and receivers, and then AM came into the fold, and then single sideband came into the fold, and then RTTY and PSK31 and some of the older, more traditional digital modes. And I think as people keep inventing new ways to do ham radio and to be a ham, the tent keeps growing, and that affords opportunities for people with interests that from the outside looking in, may not look like amateur radio. But if you take a closer look, they can be amateur radio. They are amateur radio. I mean, the high altitude ballooning, just as one aspect.
From like last week's episode.
Sure.
Or working 23 miles using the microwave emitter from the back of your bumper.
Right. 10 gigahertz, as I understand it.
Or 130 gigahertz.
Yeah. One of the podcasts that I listen to regularly in addition to this one is the Ham Radio Workbench. Mike Walker, VA3MW, almost every episode talks about something new he's doing with 10 gigahertz, the folks that he meets around Toronto.
Yeah, who would have thought you could actually work anybody?
Right, exactly. So I think for me, what's most exciting is just we keep inventing new ways to ham radio, and it grows the tent and it creates more opportunity for new people to get involved.
Right, and as individuals, it grows our expertise, kind of esoteric things on the one hand, but they have great application, those esoteric things.
Well, I mean, look at every household technology that we take for granted that started as something esoteric. Let's take the internet. Let's take the internet. It started out as a way for the Defense Department and universities to be able to communicate with each other, and it was all text. You went to your going back to the late 60s, early 70s, I'm not even sure if it was called Gopher in those days, but when I first got started in IT, you didn't have all the wonderful graphical websites that we have today and all the video content. It was all text pages, and you went and you did your research, and it was basically an online version of the card catalog at the library and the resources at the library. It wasn't very exciting, it wasn't very enticing. And today it's what the internet is today, with all of the everything, but it's something we take for granted today, but it started as something very specialized and very esoteric. And I think a lot of our technologies started that way.
Or we adapt. I think one of the things we're doing now is we're adapting technologies from other things because those things are very inexpensive. And a ham looks at it and says, I could probably make a contact with this.
Right.
As weird as it is. Do you have advice, Ian, that you'd give to newer returning hams now that you've been a VE, been a leader in the amateur radio club in your community? What advice would you give to newer returning hams?
A couple of different things, actually. Try everything you can possibly try, because there is so much, and there are activities and technologies and things we do that the one thing may not appeal to everybody in ham radio, but you're going to find something in ham radio that appeals to you. So don't knock something you're not familiar with just because you haven't tried it. Go try it and see if it appeals to you and get involved with it. I think the other thing would be, a couple of other things would be, find your interest and get involved in whatever your interest is. That it kind of goes along with trying everything and find what you like. Find what you like and get involved with it and join a club. I am a firm believer that the best way to get the Elmering and the mentoring that new hams need, or people that are coming back into the hobby after an absence of a few years, if you may want some guidance and some Elmering on what's out there and what the technologies are, your local club is probably the first best resource to find that information, because there are going to be people in your club that are involved in all kinds of different aspects of the hobby, and they can help you and they can answer questions.
I think that's wonderful advice. I've never said this before on the podcast, but I'm reminded there is a comment section on the bottom of every show notes page, and I do make sure that the guest actually knows about any messages that are directed at them. So if you have messages that you want to direct to Ian or to any of the previous 504 guests on the QSO Today podcast, if they're still alive, and most of them are, you can ask your questions, and I do let them know that questions are waiting for them. So there is a way to ask any of these experts about amateur radio, about what you might be interested in doing. That's a way to keep the conversation going.
And I'll throw out there too, Eric, my contact info is good on QRZ.
And QRZ is an amazing resource.
QRZ.com. My email address is on my QRZ page.
Ian, it's been such a wonderful opportunity to speak to you on the QSO Today podcast. I sent out an appeal this week for people to step up as guests. You were one of the first, and I appreciate it so much. In fact, I've had such a nice response that I think I've got enough potential people in the can through July, which is really terrific.
That's great.
Yeah, well, it's excellent because I'm going to be in the States for 2 weeks. It allows me to stay ahead of the curve and not miss a single episode week of QSO Today. So with that, Ian, I want to thank you for coming. It was really great.
Eric, thank you very much for having me. I'm going to fanboy for a second. I've been a long-time fan of this podcast, so it's a real honor for me to be able to be here and be part of the story. So thank you very much.
Well, we're all part of the story, and it sounds to me like, at least in Atlanta, Georgia, you're a major part of the story. It's great to be a contributor.
We all have to do our part.
That's right.
If we want the hobby to stay active and to continue to flourish, we all have to contribute in some fashion. And so I just feel like I'm doing what I need to do to help the hobby thrive.
Thanks so much. 73, Ian.
73, Eric. Thank you.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Ian. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put an NV4C in the search box at the top of the page. You can sponsor the transcription of this episode or any of the previous episodes by clicking on the transcription button on every show notes page. The cost is $75 per episode, regardless of the length. We will quickly transcribe the episode and give you credit for your sponsorship. Please send us the call sign of the podcast to make sure that we transcribe what you want. Remember that QSO Today is value for value. Please support our project by making a donation or becoming a listener sponsor today. Use our Amazon link before shopping at Amazon, as we receive a small commission on your Amazon purchases. Subscribe to our mailing lists, both my blog and the podcast, and forward the messages to friends and family who would enjoy QSO Today content. Promote us on social media and give us a 5-star rating and reviews whenever you are asked. QSO Today is available on every podcast player and venue, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and Podcasting 2.0. Get a Podcasting 2.0 player to make it easy to get your next episode as soon as we publish. My thanks to Ben Bresky, who, as the consummate artist, makes this host and his guests always sound brilliant. Ben also publishes a weekly Jewish history podcast. There is a link to that on the QSO Today homepage. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.